to our webinar. I am here today with Andy Lee, Head of Global Clinical Operations at Merck. He's worked in clinical trials for most of his career and has experience across many roles in the clinical ops ecosystem. He's even been a patient. He's going to walk us through some operating model choices, his journey at Merck, and how their clinical operating model has benefited their organization, trial operations, and patients. This is a really important conversation for those of you in clinical operations. Choosing the right model for your organization is a critical decision because your choice impacts cost, speed, and quality of the trials. So let's get right to our chat. Andy, welcome, and thank you for joining me. Let's begin with the basics. What's a clinical trial operating model, and what are the main options for clinical trial sponsors?
Great, Laurie, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. I hope I can share some of my experience over many years. I'm going to start off by sort of defining a little bit about what an operating model is and how it might look. So what we'll do is we'll just start off with the first slide. And this slide here will demonstrate to us where there's the start and where there's the finish. And for the purposes of this discussion, I've left out the manufacturing of supplies. I've left off clinical, preclinical work in animal toxicology models, etc. And I'm ending on the right with a clinical study report as the end product. So we've bookmarked from start to finish. And in this, what we do in clinical trial operations is we take an experimental concept and we express that experimental concept in a design feature often called a protocol. And it's that sentinel document that starts the discussion on how do we build an operating model. And if we think about the protocol that we start with, i.e. the experimental design, and we take it through to what might be the end product, either locked database or clinical study report, in between there is something called a value chain. And that value chain is where we add value through the execution, operationalizing and executing the trial. And this is how we select countries, how we do feasibility, how we set up in countries, how we file with the ethics committees, with the health authorities, and then how we recruit patients and we manage the trial throughout. We've selected vendors, we manage shipment of samples, we manage shipment of biological samples. And throughout that process, we monitor, control, clean, and lock the data. And in this process, we measure value in a different currency, and that currency is actually the clean data. Data is the currency in this value chain. And so for me, when we look at a model, one can decide who and how this is done, but it's pretty similar for all people who run clinical trials. And the models range from two bookends. One is where a company does everything, and the other extreme is where they do nothing. They outsource from the beginning. And so those are the two extremes of the model, but seldom actually do all of those, either one or the other. They use a hybrid, and the hybrid often involves using tools and systems that are common and deciding on those. But I don't think anyone has their own clinical labs internally at a company, i.e. where we do the blood testing and maybe do some pathology work and that. That's typically outsourced to experts. So the models vary, and you can decide which parts you keep in and which you don't. So how do companies manage this? And how they manage it is really looking carefully at how much resource they want to put into their company. Very large companies can build internal models where they have their own resource and staff, their own tools and systems. And smaller companies really cannot do that. It's too costly to do that. And if they've only got one or two compounds or run a handful of studies, it really makes no sense to build that infrastructure. So it makes sense for them to use contract research organization who have immense depth, breadth, and skill and experience. And to highlight that point, I'll just show you a slide here from the IQVIA Institute. And what this slide shows is if you look at the right-hand side, you have over 2,000 new oncology study starts in 2021, for example. And the light blue shows you the number of studies that have been run by emerging biotech companies. The dark blue is big pharma, the green is mid and small pharma. So you can see only about a third of the work is done in big, mid and small pharma. 2/3 of the work is done by emerging biotech, none of which have an operational infrastructure. So there's absolutely a ton of work. There aren't enough resources in our ecosystem, whether it's in CROs or internally at companies. So there's space for every model to work. And there's a huge dependence from emerging biotechs on the expertise and skill brought through full service CRO models. So that's the spectrum that we have. And I think what really matters is not which model you use, is how you implement the model that you choose. And all models work, and all models can fail. And so I just urge people to put the controls in place around the model that one picks. So hopefully that gives a good introduction of what type of models there are. And I will just add a little bit of flavor to that and say, as we move away from these slides for a second, is in these models, as I've said, you can outsource to people, or you can actually insource. So one of the models we use is we have some ground rules, and that's all trials are run in our tools, systems, processes. And when we don't have staff, we augment the staff and train them in our tool systems and processes. So that is done through a functional service provider model. We insource on needs. We do not have a single job that's a sacred cow. Every job can insource people. Every function can insource them. And we have variable levels of insourcing in that model.
So what should a sponsor seek to achieve with their model?
Well, I'm taking the liberty of speaking more generally about what should a sponsor do and look at sponsors in general.
Yeah.
For me, the most important thing, having worked in this field for many years, is the fundamental principles of clinical trials are, number one, human subject protection. You have to start with a basic and say which model will offer the best and complete human subject protection that you can afford. Okay, and that is non-negotiable, and it's non-binary. It's not a binary thing. It is a binary thing. Sorry, you either have it or you don't. So human subject protection. The next thing is quality. You have to have, as I've said in that value chain, reliable data that has integrity. So you've got to look at a model that protects all the subjects, gives you quality data, and is reliable in terms of the timelines. A model needs to be predictable and reliable. And if you start getting those things right, then things actually work very well. And I'm going to just give a couple of concepts here, and I'll do another slide just to show some of these principles here, which are really, really important for people to understand. And that is in what we call the sand cone model that we use and adapt. And I just hope this can come up. And this is the sand cone model. So what I hope sponsors look for in picking a provider is a group that does high quality work, starts with quality, does dependable work, i.e. they're reliable in the output of what they will deliver, at what time, to what quality standards, and to agree on those. Speed is a consequence of good quality and dependable work. Having flexible models, and then if you do those first four things right, the cost takes care of itself. But all too often, people start in the model by trying to manage the cost and contain the cost. And when you do that, you quite often compromise on the other components. And so I say, if you do the first four right, cost looks after itself, and you have a model that has low rework and high quality. And then the other thing that sponsors should seek is they should seek to be partner of choice, and they have to really work out who their stakeholders and constituents are. And quite often it's an internal audience that teams answer to, but really there's an external audience. And the model should actually give patients satisfaction and give the patients trust that the trial is actually looking after them and protecting them through the consenting and the oversight of the study. So patients are important. The investigators chosen need to know there's oversight and control. And regulators and ethics committees really need to know that whichever model you choose has those things front and center. So I ask people when they choose the model, look very carefully at the stakeholders and not the internal stakeholders. Look at the external stakeholders like patients, IRBs, regulators, and others. And you need to meet their standards and expectations in your model.
So you've had experience with many, if not all, models. In your clinical operating model journey, what were your biggest observations and challenges to solve?
Okay, so I think it's true to say I've worked in a variety of different companies, big pharma, biotech companies, and then, hybrid sort of companies who do both. And we've worked in all sorts of things from devices to vaccines to biologics, small molecules. So fortunately, over many years that I've been in this field, I have had that broad experience. I start off by saying that a model is a model is a model is a model. All models can work and all models can fail. The ones that work well, and my experience has been, you need to have clear plans, you need to do feasibility, you need to do dry runs, but most importantly, you need single points of accountability. You need dedicated staff, and you have to have low turnover, whether it's internally or externally. Turnover really kills quality of projects. And so what you need is to get the right skill level and make sure they're rewarded and motivated to stay on your project. And if you can keep the right people on the project from start to finish, your probability of success goes up exponentially. We also found that where you put the right controls in place and you decide a priori what is acceptable and what is not, and what are your tolerance limits, and what is your acceptance or error acceptance level, that is really helpful for people to then put controls in and respond quickly. And every study has something that goes wrong, every single study. The question is how do you detect it and how do you act? And that's the most important thing that regulators expect, that you have controls, oversight, and you detect and you correct as soon as possible. I found that where one can do that, where one can manage the resources, the budget, and the expectations well, you find that it's a positive experience. And it doesn't matter if it's an external model or an internal model or a hybrid model. What you have to do is get those principles right. And I've always found the best teams and the best output is always driven when you have trust and you have people that are stable and consistent on the project team with low turnover.
Okay. So how did you pivot and adopt the Merck's current model?
Yeah, so let me just go back and say that we've all worked through different models, and I think the industry has gone through different cycles, and there were cycles of build your own model and everything. And much of the work was done in big pharma and mid-sized pharma, but with time we saw the emergence of biotech, and particularly in the area you work in, Boston, it is explosive with these emerging biotechs, Southern California, everywhere. And so the model sort of changed, and we saw the model being one originally of companies built a certain amount of capacity, and then they went and did bids with CROs, and they'd get multiple CROs come in, and the one that did the best bid or whatever it was won the award, and they worked with multiple CROs depending on what the project teams wanted. That model evolved into more strategic partnerships where people said, look, this doesn't make sense to do transactional things. Let's bundle it and let's get real strategic about this and put 20 or 30 protocols into a bundle and manage it that way. Mm-hmm. And some of those worked and some of them didn't work so well. And our experience with Merck was not a particularly positive one on the strategic outsourcing, largely because timelines weren't met. There were some quality issues, and one can argue whether it was lack of oversight from the sponsor or whether it was the CRO. It doesn't matter. There were quality issues. And so we looked to pivot and change. And what we chose to do was to pack our own parachute. Okay, and what I mean by that is we decided that we were going to work in one set of tools, systems, and processes, and that we were going to pivot and take responsibility for the quality of the work. And to do that, we had to do a number of things. Okay, we started off with what we call an output model. And so that's not focusing so much on the front end. It's saying, let's sit down and say, what do we expect from this protocol? What would the label look like for the patients we're testing this medicine in? And we'd look very carefully at that, and then we'd say, in order to achieve that, we would need to do, and we'd list the things, A, B, C, and D. And so we would reverse engineer the quality in the design elements. And so what we did is we started with quality, as I showed in the sand cone model. Everything was about quality, 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 quality. And when we did that, we had to measure things. And we started off by building metrics. And we could measure, for example, historically, how many 483s we'd had, how many audits we'd had, what the audits showed, what the inspections from regulatory agencies showed, what CAPAs showed. We could look at monitoring visit reports, and we standardized all of those. We built the tools for monitors. We revamped the expectations and the training for monitors. So all of this is what I call grassroots fundamental stuff. Staffing was important. We had high turnover. We trained people, we got their CVs, we got their job descriptions, their org charts, and we built inspection readiness in everything we did. And we asked the question, not what the cost of these people are, but what's the value that they bring. And we switched to a value-based model, not a cost-based model. CRAs were absolutely essential. In 2014, we didn't have a single CRA. The consulting companies had advised that these were non-core competence and they were commodities that you could source in at low price. And we do not believe that. We believe the most valuable asset we have are clinical research associates. They're worth their weight in gold and more, and they have been a savior for our organization, particularly during the pandemic. Okay. And then what we focused on with the essential things is, if you can build the quality, then can you build the dependability? And we went to our therapeutic areas and we said, what do you need? And they said, we want reliability in the delivery of the program, top quality with reliable output. And with that, we focused on measuring all the critical milestones. We tracked about 600 milestones a year on critical milestones, whether it was protocol delivery or study startup or first patient or last patient or whatever it was. And we focused on how many of those we could deliver on time. And in the last 8 years, we've delivered more than 90% of our milestones on time. We deliver more than 90%, up in close to 100, but not all are on time. And we became time bound. In the CRO model we worked in, the best couldn't get close to 50%, of milestones on time. So we have no slippage in timelines with this model. And so once you have that reliability, it really builds confidence in the model. And then you can focus on things like repetitive work can give you speed. Then you can be flexible and change this for different therapeutic areas. And then the cost looks after itself. So what we did as well is not so much what it started new, but what we took out. We stopped doing things that were non-reliable, stopped doing things that led to poor quality, stopped doing things that led to repeat work. So we have just about no repeat work. We get it right first time, and we put a lot of energy, and it may slow us down in the beginning by several weeks or so to plan. And then we worked on standardization. Can we just standardize? And the people who do this work do it again and again and again, and then you become really good at it. It becomes rote. So we're not changing teams out, and the standards and function are there, and our people are highly fungible. We can move them from TA to TA because the systems and processes are common. So that was our big focus, is to look at the model and to build our own capabilities and capacity. Now, having said that, we still work with CROs. We acquire smaller companies. We do mergers and acquisitions and deals. And the CROs come with those companies, and we work with the CROs in that capacity. But the vast majority is run in our systems, our tools, and our model.
Okay. Is there anything that you haven't already gone over with results and what you're seeing about how Merck's trials are benefiting the company and the patients?
I just want to go back to the golden job function, and that's the CRAs. Okay, so we've invested tremendously in CRAs. We believe that they're important, and having them on site and doing that, they do so much more than what everyone gives them credit for. It's an extremely valuable job. And what we have found is, since we've invested in people and seen the value in their competence, we have seen a massive reduction in turnover. So we have extremely low turnover in the internal model, whether it's in regional heads or whether it's in country people, whether it's in clinical operations managers, research managers, CRAs, CRA managers. And we've seen extremely low turnover in our functional service provider model. And a lot of this is because we believe in the people, we provide them the tools, the training, and we are realistic on what they can do. Okay, that they are not seen as have to get X amount of work done so they can be recoverable. And we do not use a labor arbitrage model. We actually resource to what is actually needed. So we try and take some of that pressure off the CRAs. The good thing about the turnover is that it improves the quality. If you have low turnover, your quality goes up. So these are pretty simple concepts, and taking away this idea of these are commoditized jobs is really important. What we've also seen is as we look at our ecosystem, we strive to be partner of choice. And one of the biggest complaints from sites is they want to see the same person. They don't want to see different people all the time. So that actually helps a lot in partner of choice. And then what this has done is, as we do repetitive work, and we do a lot of oncology work, about 70% of our work is in oncology. We weren't doing that in 2014. We only had about 2 or 3%, but we've ramped up. And what we've seen now is a couple of things that have come out. Firstly is that the British Medical Journal published an article about 6 months ago, which asked the question, what predicts recruitment into oncology trials between 2015 and the current time, which was about 2020 odd when they did the analysis. And what you look at is saying that if it's a phase 3 study, it recruits better than if it's an earlier phase. And that's because phase 3 is a confirmatory trial and you've shown proof of concept. It also says if you're first line cancer therapy or second line, it recruits better than in later lines of therapy. And so that makes sense. But they had a third factor that we saw was it matters who runs the study. And we said, wow, okay, so in trepidation, we read the article. And what it said was that if a study is run by Merck, it recruits 1.5 to 2 times faster than all other sponsors. And we were absolutely flabbergasted because it's difficult to recruit oncology trials. We struggle. We believe it's very difficult, and we are always up against our timelines to do this. But that has huge impact for a company. If we look at what that means, is if a cancer study, typically takes us 2 years to recruit, it's going to take someone else 3 or 4 years. And if you think of 1 year of a product like Keytruda, which sold $22 billion, there's a huge value in the ability to do those things. And that inherent sort of improvement, I think, has to do with stability and the fact that we've got stable CRAs and a stable workforce, and the model has played out. So that's one component. The other one is that we have the SCRS, Eagle Award that comes out where sponsors are voted. And, this is a difficult award, and it's one that's spread around the industry. And we were fortunate enough to have won that award last year. And we're quite proud of that because this is coming through the pandemic, and we know the disruption at the sites, and we know they've lost staff, and there's been the big resignation. And us and other companies, thank you to them as well, and they need to be applauded, have helped augment staff at sites, and they've helped, make sure that they can not firstly poach their staff. We don't like to do that, and we'd like to augment and help sites with staff. And I think that's paid off for us in the relationship, and people say this is a sponsor that's helping us through the hard times.
Sure.
The other value in the model is I'll give an example. We ran a heart failure study. Most large cardiovascular studies have been run by academic research organizations. We all know them. We were told that sponsors should not run these studies, that we're not capable and everything. And we ran a heart failure study with 5,050 patients. At 4 years, our loss to follow-up was a grand total of 3 patients lost to follow-up. No one has ever had that retention. And what that does is it gives great confidence in the outcome of the trial. You're not imputing, missing subjects are treated as treatment failures, etc. We've had similar success in HIV studies during the pandemic that recruited quicker than we thought because we had a great focus on patient centricity. And what we're looking at now is we're not chasing the missing monitoring visit report. We're not chasing compliance issues. What we're doing is we're looking at innovative ways where we can engage diverse patients, different ways of recruiting and managing our studies. And that pays off in the quality of the data and the output. And we believe it has a really strong positive effect on the output of the trial. So if a study does fail, we believe it fails because the molecule did not do what it intended to do, not because there was operational failure.
That is a compelling reason to think about your operating model and revise whenever you can. I really enjoyed our conversation, Andy. Thank you so much. And to our viewers, our hope is that you can apply today's insights to your organization. And I would love to have you back at some point to dig in a little bit further, because you shared with me some examples that were really compelling.